Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all. Um, this morning, yesterday, in my reading, I came upon a poem by Basho, and I just thought I'd begin with this. Basho wrote, Basho, perhaps I should say, if you're not familiar with Basho, he's, I think, considered by many now today to be perhaps the greatest of all haiku poets in Japan. He was late 17th century Japan. But Basho wrote, not knowing the name of the tree, I stood in the flood of its sweet smell. Not knowing the name of the tree, I stood in the flood of its sweet smell. And in reading that, I was, very moved by this. Just these few words of Basho. Not knowing the name of the tree. And for us, I think we want to know things, and of course, when we know the names of things, we often feel like, well, now I know it, or perhaps we feel like I don't know it until I know the name of something. But this isn't the real knowledge. This is just our idea of an experience. But he says, not knowing the name of the tree, I stood in the flood of its sweet smell. It's there, the true knowledge of this tree, or whatever it was, is right there. Just in, and not just in the smell of the tree, but in that direct experience of the tree. Was there sunshine? Was he also feeling the warmth of the sun as he stood there and looked at the tree? Whatever else might be there. But in that moment, we have true knowledge of what is taking place. If we just turn our attention to that, or it's not even so much turning our attention to it because it's all enveloping, the true knowledge of just this, what is taking place. But if we want to pick out some particular thing and then identify it, I want to know the name of that tree, we begin to distract ourselves from the actual experience. And even though, of course, we still smell the tree, we say it's there, but Basho is speaking of something else here, something that goes beyond just noting that the tree was giving off a beautiful fragrance right now. Perhaps it's in bloom or whatever. And but what he's saying is not knowing the name of the tree. So even though we don't know the name of things, still, here it is. This is taking place. Sometimes we might feel like, well, if I know the name, and we might be, well, what is that tree? That's beautiful. That smell is so beautiful. I just want to know, what kind of tree is that? What is that tree? And we're eager maybe to, I don't know, enhance the moment or to recall it. So if we can find out the name, we can come back to it. All of that. But in the process of doing that, to the extent that we give ourselves to that, we lose the experience, just the richness of just this moment, this smell, this feeling of warmth or coolness or whatever it might be, the song of the bird, all that is taking place. It's with our thinking and grasping, very much, very often at least, in an effort to better know what is taking place. But that isn't real knowledge. The actual knowledge is right there in the wafting smell of the tree and everything else that is taking place. In Basho, then he had a description here. He talks about writing poetry, and in the book I was reading, and he went on to say, he said, "Go to the pine if you want to learn about the pine, or to the bamboo if you want to learn about the bamboo. And in doing so, you must leave your subjective preoccupation with yourself. Otherwise, you impose yourself on the object and do not learn. Your poetry issues of its own accord when you and the object have become one, when you have plunged deep enough into the object to see something like a hidden glimmering there. However well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, if the object and yourself are separate, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit." What a wonderful phrase. I'm going to read that again. Go to the pine if you want to learn about the pine, or to the bamboo if you want to learn about the bamboo. And in doing so, you must leave your subjective preoccupation with yourself. Otherwise, you impose yourself on the object and do not learn. Your poetry issues of its own accord when you and the object have become one, when you have plunged deep enough into the object to see something like a hidden glimmering there. However well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, if the object and yourself are separate, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit. What an incredible little phrase there. Little piece. We'll go to the pine. If you want to know the pine or the bamboo, then go to the pine. If you want to learn about the pine, go to the pine or to the bamboo, and go to the bamboo. And in doing so, he said, you must leave your subjective preoccupation with yourself. This is hard for us to do. It may be unusual for us, unless we realize what we're doing. And if we also maybe call to mind what it is that we want to do. We want to learn about the pine or the bamboo or whatever it might be. The beautiful smell of the tree that you don't know the name of. But if you want to know this, if you want to know this tree, this plant, this bird, this whatever it might be, then go to that. Bring your attention to that. And but you're going to have to leave behind all these other things that normally occupy us. We see ourselves in relation to other things. We might want to know, what we can do, maybe to enhance the moment, to improve the object, to make it smell more intense, or whatever it might be. But he says, in doing so, you must leave your subjective preoccupation with yourself. Otherwise, you will impose yourself on the object and do not learn. And we impose ourselves. We might think something like, well, I want to do this. I want to make this change over here. Or I want to make it different over here. Or if I had one of those, then I could, immediately we're busy with thoughts like that very easily. But we don't have to be. If we truly love the moment, the beautiful smell, the beautiful sight, whatever it might be, this is the time to forget that you're having it, to forget yourself, to be the very thing that is otherwise projected out there in your mind. You're in it. You're in the picture. You don't need to set it out there and to name it and to weigh it out or to find out how you can capture it and take it home or redo it in another place or at some other time. Yes, I mean, we can certainly learn these things. I'm not saying don't ever do something like that. But this precious moment is right here in the living of it, right now. Maybe in that first startling moment, you first smell the fragrance of this tree that you don't know the name of. Doesn't mean, yes, we can learn the name of the tree eventually. Maybe you want to get such a tree planted in your yard, whatever. But then that's one thing. But how often do we take the time to just slow down, realize where we are, realize what is happening all around? What is it that would move us if we just get out of the way and let it take us and show us what it is? If we want to learn about the tree or the bird or whatever it is, then we must go there. And go there without taking ourselves, taking all the baggage and our plans and motives. That can come later, or if you have to indulge that, but there's got to be this moment where you set that aside and where you can really taste what is taking place and smell what is taking place, hear what is taking place, instead of the continuous yammering that might be going on in our minds if we're not careful with this moment. So if you want to learn about the pine or the bamboo, you must leave your subjective preoccupation with yourself and your world and your plans and what you want and what you don't want. Otherwise, he says, you impose yourself on the object and do not learn. We don't wake up to what is actually being lived out here. And of course, this is going on moment by moment. How often do we allow ourselves to really learn what is in this moment? And of course, what is in this moment, and what Basho, I think, is pointing to here, is reality itself, right there, right here. Before we make anything of it, before we want to turn it into something of our own or improve it, or if it's something disgusting to us, that we find a way to diminish it or get rid of it or something of that sort. Always with ourselves. We bring ourselves into the picture, and then we never really learn anything. We can live out our whole life, and of course we learn all the details of how to arrange things and name things and all of that. Of course, you'll never learn everything that way, but maybe enough, that can occupy us for a lifetime even, and yet never taste the strawberry or smell the tree. And of course we say, well, I know I've tasted strawberry. Have you really? The Basho goes on here. He says, when your poetry issues of its own accord, when you and the object have become one, when you have plunged deep enough into the object to see something like a hidden glimmering there. However well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, if the object and yourself are separate, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit. It's just you creating something which is counterfeit. It's fake. It's not this moment. It's not the smell of the tree, the taste of the strawberry or whatever. So the poetry, or yourself as an artist, as expressing this truly and freely, uh, I think the art, the poetry, the music, that we might experience, those things that have been created by people, and that really move us, not just move people in the moment, of our time, our culture, the passing fancies of the day, but those who have moved people in such a way that centuries later, we're still partaking of that art, that music, that sound, that poetry. This is stuff that is coming from the world as a whole, and through tasting and knowing the experience as a whole in totality. It isn't coming from one particular point of view. Of course, we can express things that way as well. But even there, we can still recall and note that it is in the context of something larger than any one individual. But this is to truly know what is taking place here. Then he says, your poetry then issues of its own accord when you and the object have become one. Basically, when you have stepped away, you're not just you are the object, and in being the object, you are the whole. You are totality. There's no separation from this. My teacher, Katagiri Roshi, every once in a while, he would say this. He would just say that you are not you. You are the whole universe. But he said, but you're not the whole universe. You are you. But you are not you. You're the whole universe. But you're not the whole universe. And he would repeat this, kind of rocking back and forth. This is what you are. You are all this. We think that we're a confined thing, confined to our skin and maybe the extent of our voice. Of course, now with modern technology, we can extend our voice. We can even project it in various ways off into distant space. All of our television signals and things that have gone on now for decades. It's just radiating out, sphere, radiating outward at the speed of light. Yeah. But still, even after millions of years, it's still a very tiny area, and it's pretty thinned out. So, but right from the very start, you are the whole. Of course, it isn't you, because if you are you, well, you're not the whole. You're just some tiny thing here, separate and apart from everything else, and maybe a little too preoccupied with just this little thing here that you might think you are. We can forget that, drop that, and realize there's no boundaries here. There's nothing dividing you from the smell of the tree or from the taste of the strawberry. And if we can speak from this or write from this, write some poetry, but it won't be you. Compose some music, but it won't be you. It won't be you sitting there thinking about, to learn the rules of how you can construct this or construct that. And then now you need to sharpen this or flat that or whatever, if it's music or according to the rules or whatever else. Or just some thinking, planning, poking around on the piano and discovering this or that, or seeing if this works or that works. But it's just too much thinking there, calculating there, instead of just opening yourself to the moment, to the tree, the bird, the sun, whatever, and forgetting yourself, knowing that the whole universe is right here, and let it come forward and speak or sing or give you the words or the sound and the fragrance, whatever it might be, and let that speak. And then maybe you can say something or jot something down in a word or in a little drawing or whatever it might be. And it will be far more likely, it will be something that will move people, not just people of the day because you've drawn some little catchy little thing now that is the fad of the moment, but something that is universal and will move people even generations from now. Because it was the universe speaking. It wasn't you. It was totality. But to feel this, to know this, to open yourself to this, and to hear it, and to see it, and to smell it, and taste it, this is available to all of us. We only need to get ourselves out of the way, our little self here. I don't mean to destroy this little self. Of course, we have to live with it. But we don't need to completely restrict ourselves to that always and never taste the wholeness of the moment. If once we could just taste that, see it, smell it, hear it, it could change our life, really. And we have to oscillate back back and forth, like Katagiri Roshi. You're not you, you're the universe. But you're not the universe, you are you. But you're not you. If we're just looking at this in a kind of a conceptual way, and well, here I am, yes, I'm here, and you're over there, and all, we won't understand what Katagiri Roshi is pointing to there. Or Basho, here as he's speaking to what, potential writers of poetry, perhaps. Taking it in kind of a just all too conceptual, intellectual. We're just grasping at the words, the concepts, the ideas, instead of just letting all of that drop away and to feel. The feeling and the tasting and the smelling, well, any one of these senses could be shut down at the moment for whatever reason. But they're up and running all the time, pretty much all the time. But how often do we allow them to just speak in their own way and to hear that sound, hear that music, that poetry? Let that speak. And then out of that, we can, I think of, I don't know if this really occurred, if it was in anybody's writing there or not, but in the movie Amadeus, it was a popular movie, maybe most of you have seen that, about Mozart, and kind of through the eyes of Salieri, another composer of the day. But he was, there's a scene in the movie where he's looking at Mozart's writings, his scores, and just written out by hand, and he's page after page, and he's just marveling. There's no corrections here. There's no going back over it and redoing it. And he said he wrote it out as if he were taking dictation. And I think, yeah, it's probably something just like that for one such as Mozart. And where he hears this, but it isn't him speaking. You can't write it out that fast if you're trying to create it, if you're trying to make it. The music is already there. You just hear it and you write it down. If you have that particular skill of a Mozart, that you can write what you hear, even if you're hearing it just in your mind. Or the words, if you're one who writes this moving poetry or storytelling or whatever it might be. Or even this kind of creativity can go on even within the sciences and things like this. It doesn't have to be just limited to the arts. But where what's moving you is something outside of yourself. It is life itself. It is totality itself. And we can tap into it if we start to learn and to catch ourselves in the tight confines of our own little point of view, our mind, our preoccupation with self. making myself happy, making myself, protected and all of this, making myself grand in some way, or small if we want to hide away, or shyness is what occupies us. But whatever it is, it's still, we allow ourselves to be confined by ourselves, and usually in an effort to feel good and to feel protected, comforted. And with that, we cut ourselves out of what is there, that we are the universe, the whole, totality. Of course, it isn't you, it isn't me, but whatever we are, whatever you are, whatever I am, it isn't confined to something small. And realizing that it doesn't then make us grand in some particular way, that's still just an idea, still a constructed thing. And if it's a constructed thing like that, that's fine. It might be useful in some ways, but it is to sell ourselves short and to not taste wholeness, and to realize that we're living out wholeness, or wholeness is living out as us. This is what we can find here. So Basho, he says, your poetry issues of its own accord when you and the object have become one. And becoming one with the object, that brings in everything. I could show you that. I've done that on other occasions. I'll leave that for now. But everything gets tied into it. And when you have plunged deep enough into the object to see something like a hidden glimmering there, and that hidden glimmering this is the world as a whole. This is life. This is the vitality of the moment. It is all right there. And you, as yourself, as something tiny, are not in the way. But he says, however well phrased your poetry might be, you've studied the rules, you know how to construct this kind of a poem and that sort of thing, whatever it might be. However well phrased, however learned you are in the ways of this particular art and skill and whatever, however well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, if the object and yourself are separate, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit. And if it's yours in that way, it's something, it is something false because it is not something natural. I'm going to just take a look at some of these words here. But however well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, he says. Well, what do we mean by natural? No. And we can argue about this, I suppose. But I talk about natural. It's in our teachings. Usually not so much that phrase, because they've come from other cultures that maybe aren't looking at things quite in this way. But in the way that we might phrase them today. But there's, the Buddha spoke of, there's two kinds of action. And this really gets to the heart of his insight, and is tied very closely to, not tied, it's actually another way of looking at his deep insight of the fact that we don't find a self, that thing that we occupy ourselves with, but we don't even, if we look carefully, we don't even find that within the experience. Right there with that, the Buddha also realized and spoke of it. It's kind of looking at the same thing with from a slightly different angle. And he talks about will, or willed action, which is how he defined the word karma, which is, I don't even want to use that word. I generally don't, because it's so misunderstood in our culture today, especially. Karma just simply means action. Literally, that's what the word means, action. But when the Buddha used that term, he was talking about, many of you know this, I've said it many times, but he's talking about willed action. And if you notice, if you just look at that word will, there's the confining factor. It's bringing it down to you, tightening it down into your own little sphere. And you and I, we will act, if we're tied to just this little perspective that we have here, alone. It's fine. It's functional and useful sometimes to be there. It's not like we have to destroy this. But just realize in doing that, we've shut out everything else, or at least we've diminished it, or our chance of living with it and feeling it and hearing it and thinking it and drinking it and all of that. We've diminished that. And now we are going to make the thing our own in some way. That's what I was talking about earlier. Well, we can do this with the tree, and I'd like to plant. I want to know the name so I can find out what kind of tree it is and go to Bachman's or someplace and buy the bush or the tree or the whatever, so I can smell that. There we are. We've made it, and it's willed, and we're trying to bring about particular results. And we get frustrated and angry if we're thwarted in some way. Or we feel glorious and wonderful if somehow we win some little victory here, until we're occupied with the next thing that comes along and we forget about the little bush we planted there in the corner of the yard. But whatever it might be. But to the awakened, they don't lose sight. We can do all these things, but they don't lose sight of totality. Wholeness. And the place where your heart sings is with that. And and it sings with the understanding, the true knowing of what is actually taking place, knowing the sweet smell, even though we don't even have the name of the tree that produces that sweet smell. But living with this and living out of this and allowing that knowledge, that awakeness to then speak in terms of poetry, if we're a poet, or music, and if we're a composer or something like that, or the way the painting, if we're an artist, or even to see some intricate behavior of nature or something like this. And that's where we have someone like an Einstein, say, who can just visualize and see, ask himself some questions about what was this, and he sees it. He's tuning into something outside of himself. I could demonstrate that in some ways, but I won't drag in that sort of thing now. But what I'm trying to say is that this creativity or whatever, it's across the board. It isn't just limited to what we might define as the arts or something like that. But in every case, it's a matter of getting out of the way. It's not entirely out, because we can't entirely. We still have bodies. Here we are. This is the smaller reality. We can't leave it, but we can tune into something that's not just confined to this little space. And again, I think this is what Basho is trying to help us see in speaking of poetry here, which was what he knew. This is his art, how he expressed himself. So however well phrased your poetry may be, if your feeling is not natural, so the naturalness then of it is you're out of the way. You're not trying to bring about some particular results. It is, we talk about, well, we call it natural. It's like nature, the way the leaves fall from the tree and how they get scattered in the yard and the kind of patterns of leaves on the ground. If we don't come along and rake them or fool around with them or whatever, they're just left there. They will have this beautiful pattern. It will always be random, completely random. This is by chaos. Chaos, by the way, too, is a kind of a signal that the whole world is involved with this, the scattering of the leaves. But the whole world is also involved with being totally open to that flood of the sweet smell of the unnamed tree. And it's always there, always available. If we get ourselves out of the way, we can taste it, And then we can write about it or whatever else. But coming out of that, not coming out of my idea. Oh, I think we can do this or that, because we're hearing it. We already taste it. We can hear it and see it and smell it. The words are there even before we put them there. It's almost we can pick them out of the air. So, okay, so he says, if the feeling is not natural, we're not allowing the world to speak through us, and to create that music or whatever. If the object and yourself are separate, okay, so the poetry, however well phrased it may be, if the object and yourself are separate, and so first is if your feeling is not natural, and if the object and yourself are separate. And this is, to be separate is that we're just dealing with the concept of whatever it is that we've created there now. Through consciousness, there's some conceptual construct that's appearing there, and we're occupied with that. And of course, along with that is here I am too, constructed and built in opposition to that thing that I'm seeing or hearing out there. And we're living just with this, instead of realizing it's the whole that's expressing itself here in totality. So if the feeling then is not natural, or the object and yourself are separate, I am here and the thing is over there. I'm going to work on that. I want to improve it, or maybe I want to get rid of it, but that sort of thing is involved now. Instead of letting the whole thing speak to us and tell us what we can do with this moment, and to live out of it completely and totally in kind of a relaxed way, without fussing or worrying too much about getting things to go the way we want. So he said, if the object and yourself are separate, you're still seeing it in the conceptual way, through the intellect and all of that. And the intellect is perfectly fine, but it can't give you everything, and it's going to cut you short of the whole. This is why Dogen speaks of, and he says of our practice, cease from practice based on intellectual understanding. This is why. If you want to taste awakening, enlightenment, just don't rely on that. It might be useful in many ways, but to experience this in its freedom, and by the way, that's what nirvana is referring to, is this kind of freedom in seeing this, knowing this, living out of it. So he says, no matter how well phrased it is, but if the feeling is not natural, if the object and the subject, you and the whatever you're viewing, are separate, and he says, then your poetry is not true poetry, but merely your subjective counterfeit. Merely something you've captured that moment. Maybe you do smell the tree or whatever, and now but you will turn it into, try to capture it in a jar and then run tests on it or whatever, even whether not only necessarily scientific, tests or examinations or whatever, but in just trying to pick it apart in some particular way and then to construct something from it. And we can do this. We can do things like that. There's this creativity can be brought into even something like that. We have to be very careful. But what can't be lacking, we really want to produce the art that it can't be ours. There has to be this element, or this, it's probably more than just an element, but this factor in there of wholeness and an openness to that. And maybe having some of the things, if you're a painter and you put some brush strokes on the canvas and whatever, where you're startled yourself by what you see, and you realize that is the brush stroke. That brush stroke needs to stand there, needs to stay, and as opposed to a calculated one. This brings to my mind, something I've mentioned a number of times. Suzuki Roshi refers to, I think it's in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, about how Zen masters of the past or whatever, they would try to put, they have a ink brush, and and with some paper in front of them there, and they would try to put dots on the page, but in a random fashion, the way the leaves would begin to fall from a tree in the fall onto the lawn, and totally random. You try to do that. And they knew, they could sense the link between themselves and their thinking, their calculating, and that pattern there that I'm creating on the canvas or the paper or whatever isn't really random. They would do this to watch their own mind, to see what's going on in their own mind, the calculating, and well, okay, there's a dot there, and here's one. So I don't know, maybe I should put one over here now. This will make it random because I got, and maybe I got too many up here now. Maybe I should put one over here to balance it. You know, this will enter into it, and so what they would exercise is just for the freedom to just be within their own minds, is to see if they can do this. You got to pay very close attention to your heart and your mind, and see if you can. It's sort of like Yakusan. This is all, I've told that story so many times. I feel like I can just mention it. No, where he's just sitting there doing nothing. And in a way, okay, so here the master is going to put he's doing something. And he's putting those dots on a page. Yeah, so he's doing that, but that's it. He's just putting those dots on. He's not doing something else, like trying to figure out where the next dot should go. What his concern is the mind open? Is it free? The hand is going up, touching the page, putting the dot on the page, but it is not me driving that hand, steering that hand. It reminds me too of one of my favorite lines out of Moby Dick, where Captain Ahab, there's the very end of the book now. I think it's the chapter called The Symphony, where he says, it's just before those last three chapters, the chase, first day, second day, third day. But where is he talking with Starbuck? I forget now. But where he just asks this question. He says, is it I, God, or who that lifts this hand? And there, I think Melville is kind of reaching for the same thing here. By that time in Moby Dick, he was well into being the great writer that he became, writing that book. He started out as a bit of a potboiler, author of just little potboilers and things. He started to realize he was writing a great book in the process of writing Moby Dick. And in getting to that place, those last chapters, you get into some very profound questions there. So what is it? Is it I that lifts this hand, that moves it to do this to the whale or whatever? Is it God? Is there some other directive out there, some motive, something out there that's directing it? Or who? And he doesn't know where else to go. That lifts this hand, this arm. And of course, it's kind of like we can sense that out of the whole, within our lives right now, there's something in us here that we can taste and feel and respond to that is coming from out of the whole. Sometimes people will think, we'll project something else there then. Maybe we'll call it God or something like that. Well, that's directing it. But that's still the same thing. It's coming from a particular point. God, and we even talk about the will of God. Well, if God is everything, created everything, all of this, you can't have will. Will is coming from the part, the little thing. And it's not natural, as we would say. What is natural is what comes from the whole, from totality. So it's not, you can't really say it's I. I wouldn't say it's not I, or I wouldn't say it's not God. We don't have to go that far. That's, in a way, it's just kind of perpetuating the problem. But when Ahab asks, or who, or what, Yeah. Let it be that, because if it's you that's steering this hand, that's going to take this action, just be careful there. Be very careful, because whatever we do, take action on or speak of or paint or compose or whatever, it does go out into the universe as a whole, in spite of ourselves. And so the actions that we take, they're not just, if they're harmful actions, it might not just be harmful to you yourself, but to others as well. If we can learn to speak out of wholeness, to act out of wholeness, this is kind of like the fulfillment of the golden rule, but in the negative form. We will not be doing unto others what we would not have done unto ourselves. That is a way to keep the golden rule. You can't keep it by doing it directly. Doing unto others as you would do unto you, as you would have done unto yourself, that leads to trouble. There's karma in that, and it's always linked to pain. So we can find this in our hearts, in our minds, but you have to kind of keep an eye on yourself. Don't judge yourself. Oh, I slipped up there. No, it's very natural. That's natural. It's common for us human beings. Well, we can learn to start making less calculated moves and be less occupied with my concerns here in my little corner of the world, and learn to keep ourselves open to the whole. Well, I guess I've gone on long enough here. Maybe I should probably stop. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. I think you can either raise the blue hand or the however you do that. I think most of you know that. Yeah, Jeff.
Well, thank you. I learned a lot hearing this, and I want to read some more of what Basho said from what you mentioned.
Yeah, the passage is from one of his travel guides, or where he apart from the poetry, he also wrote traveling things. It's from The Narrow Road to the Deep North and other
Narrow Road to the Deep North. Okay.
Yeah, and other travel sketches.
The thing that interested me is on the rare occasions when I feel like I've looking back afterwards have done something creative, I usually, when I think about it, on the one hand, yes, I'm open to what he calls an object in this place, but I've also feel as if all kinds of people I've read or interacted with or engaged with going way back are with me too. And there's a kind of combination of culture and perception / conception that happens together. He doesn't really talk about, which is fine. I mean, I don't think that's what these folks that he doesn't really talk about the culture of poetry and tradition of poetry that brings me to that moment at the tree. And so that was kind of my question. I just wondered about that part.
Yeah, well, I think it is just simply for one, I mean, he's a lucky man in that at some point he just could see it's a matter of just stepping out of the way, and there it is. There isn't anything we need to do about this. It's already available to all of us right from the very start. We only need to realize that there is such a thing as this, and the way to express it or to learn it or to find it is just simply to get out of the way. So there's nothing special about it, and nothing necessarily unique to Basho, other than he was just one of many people in their own way. His talent or whatever it was with words, but this is available to us in all sorts of ways. And so it's just simply a matter of getting out of the way. I don't know if I responded properly to you there or not.
Oh no, that's fine. It's just that in my own experience, when I feel on the rare occasions when I have gotten out of my own way, all kinds of other people are with me. You know, people I've known and people I've just read and so forth. And it's like, it's kind of opening yourself to a moment that's not just about the object, it's also about a culture kind of opening the object for you.
Mhm.
I'm kind of not making a lot of sense, but I'm trying.
Yeah, but that is open for you right from the start, and we can find that even if you're locked in a prison and heaped with chains, you can still find this. You don't need the culture around you necessarily to open it for you and that sort of thing. You can find it right from the start, whatever your circumstance. So again, I'm not quite sure if I'm responding directly to what you're saying, but
No, it's fine. Thank you. I appreciate it.
okay. Yeah, Peter.
Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Steve Matusek, this is very reminiscent of our correspondence over this last week. Steve Matusek had put out a mailing about this time of year. We're starting to hear different bird songs.
Oh yeah.
And I have been a birder since I was probably 8 years old. And I recall vividly as an adult while I was sitting zazen in Nome, Alaska, and all of a sudden I heard a black-capped chickadee outside my window, which in Nome, Alaska, you just don't hear. And it literally brought me back off my seat just to go make sure that that's what I heard. And I find myself in the many places I've called home, while I'm sitting with the windows open, oh, that's a Carolina wren. Oh, that's the first yellow warbler of the year. And it's an exercise in right mindfulness, and as you say, bringing it back to just the wholeness. And I found some readings that refer to it as bringing it again, returning to silence. I think would be a good case. We do it, but just be able to just come back to the silence that you hear, even in the bird song, even when you hear the lawnmower of your next door neighbor, you come back
Well,
to
that's
silence.
right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? I don't know if I have anything to respond with, but thank you for that. Very good observation. Anything else? Okay, well, oh, Cindy.
I was just thinking as you were talking, Steve, that some of the examples you gave, like Basha's poetry or Mozart's music, were involved in, I don't know, what we might call the arts, or some kind of activity that we might label creativity. But it sounds like what you're talking about, though, it's available in everyday life. How sometimes you just see in cooking, or in caring for another person, or just in all different kinds of ways.
Yes.
When that kind of scheming mind is not in charge, you just see, oh, this is this, oh yeah, and you don't have an idea about, I'm going to do this and then that will happen, and then but you just see, oh, this, and then you just you do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
We only need to make ourselves ready. That's all, and live out of that moment by moment. So and it doesn't mean we can't have our plans and working it out, but don't be so totally lost in that we're not still with the whole. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay, I don't see any other hands here, so maybe that's it for this morning. So thank you. It was good to see you all. Have a good day.